to a series of conversations called My Lourdes Story, where I'll be talking to various people about their Lourdes experience and what Lourdes means to them. I'm Joan Cahill, and I've spent a lot of time over the last few years in Lourdes, a place that is very special to me. Today I'm talking to Dr. Michael Moran. Michael is the first Irish person to be appointed to an international committee that evaluates cures in Lourdes. So Michael, you're very welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today.
Thanks, Joan. Thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So before we talk about Lourdes, will you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you're from Finaghy in South Belfast, so can you tell us a little bit about growing up there, your family, school, and life in general?
Sure. Yeah, so I was born in 1980, so I turned 40 in lockdown last year and starting to feel a bit older now. And went to school in St Anne's in Finaghy and secondary school in Rathmore, which is just a school right behind St Anne's, so I didn't have to travel too far for that. And then was all part of St Anne's parish growing up and was an altar boy, and so would have had quite a good link to the parish through my mum and dad, I guess, and would have gone to weekday masses and whatnot, and we always felt quite connected to the church growing up, which was great. It's always been a source of kind of social connection as well as spiritual connection. And then my relationship, I guess, with Lourdes started when I was 16, when I went on the youth team for the first time. Now, I'd been there before. My parents were teachers, so we always used to head off to Europe with a car and caravan. And so a few times we'd been through Lourdes before, so I was really familiar with it. But a place came up kind of at the last minute, so it was very much providential the year I went for the first time because it was a cancellation. And off I went on the bus with the rest of the youth team. I think I knew one person or maybe two on the bus, and that's where the journey started. And
you studied in Queen's, Michael, yeah?
I did, yeah. So I did my medical degree in Queen's, and then I did some postgraduate, degrees there too. So I was very much a Queen's person, in the sense that I was the PhD there as well and a master's. That said, I'm kind of a bit of a rambler in the sense that, in between times I was in Australia for a year, I was in Manchester for a year, back to Belfast, and then ended up in London, and then eventually Germany, where I'm currently based.
And you're back in Ireland at the moment, you were saying?
I am back, yes. I'm very glad to be back. We're sort of in Donegal near Marble Hill. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful, and it's a COVID-based, reason to be here, but a great reason to be here. And it's also really brought me, back to Ireland in a really sort of nice way. Especially, beautiful place to go for walks, even with the 5-kilometre radius. And then it's just given us that bit of a connection to home and to family because, when you live away and there's travel restrictions in place, it can be very difficult to feel connected. And also you kind of obviously worry about older and more vulnerable relatives and friends.
Yeah, so it's nice to be back home for a while anyway. Mm-hmm. The first time you went to Lourdes, did you go as a youth leader, was it? Or just as part of the youth?
Just a group, just as I was 16. So I went for 5 years, ultimately with the Down and Connor Diocesan Youth Team. And really the first time it was just completely new to me. I'd known people who'd been and I knew that it existed, but didn't really know what to expect. And then sort of that just continued over the next few years. And I took a couple of breaks in between. So it was whilst I was also studying medicine and going to the States on the J1 visa for a couple of summers. But it was the kind of a continuous thread through those years. And then I first then went as a doctor, really just as I qualified, or after my first year qualified, when Father Paul Fleming, who was the pilgrimage director at the time for Down and Connor, had said that they were short of doctors, and so would I come in the medical team, and that sort of started that next chapter for me. But it was just very much something to do at the start of the summer, kind of aligned as well, I suppose, to some like vocational career that I had planned in terms of medicine. But a huge social scene as well, in terms of like absolutely fantastic people, real camaraderie. And then we travelled by bus down through, England and France. And you built up really strong bonds even in those first few days of the trip and gave you sort of really sense of a common purpose that when you got to Lourdes, everyone was really raring to go when the assisted pilgrims arrived, to really sort of start like really getting stuck in. And then it's that mix of like burning the candle at both ends with like work hard, play hard and pray hard, I guess, is the third part of that. So it's been brilliant.
I'd say when you arrive, your feet doesn't touch the ground. I'd say you're very, very busy. But I'm sure like myself, when you are there, the spirituality and the friendship, as you mentioned, it's so important really, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a real sort of sense of community, and I think especially if you're a young person, you maybe don't necessarily have that Catholic identity beyond maybe your family circle. You probably have it through your school to a degree, but in a kind of maybe by studying RE or having school masses and stuff. But you don't really have like a personal faith journey, I don't think. And then whenever you go to Lourdes and you realise that there's lots of like-minded people, and bear in mind, a lot of the people who are in Lourdes maybe are there because their parents booked them a place on the youth team and they weren't necessarily wanting to go. But I think it definitely is transformational for many people. And also then creates a real sense of community in the sense that, you've got so much in common with people. And I don't think it's the, necessarily like the Northern Ireland sectarian Catholicism versus, other, Christian faiths as the big kind of divide. It's more like within Catholicism itself, even, that you've got people who really have a spirituality at the core of their being, I guess, in terms of their worldview and how, they feel the world should be. And I think Lourdes is that. It sort of gives us all an idea of the sense of the world in a much better way that, that maybe COVID has also taught us to a degree.
I can hear from talking to you there, I think Lourdes is probably in your blood. Your mum and dad, were they involved with Lourdes as well?
Yeah, so I mean, they were in the sense that they introduced me to it, and my grandparents as well on my mum's side, would have been had a great devotion to Lourdes, and I still have actually here on this desk my rosary beads that my nana had given me years and years ago from a caravanning trip. So, and then the other thing is, I think, allegedly, although I can't testify to this, I was there when my mum was pregnant, so I think that was the first trip. And then I remember very, very, very vague memories of being there when John Paul II was there. So we always kind of ended up in summer holidays and things. And then I then went, and then actually, interestingly, Daddy came back, so he joined the Broncardier team in Down in Connor after I'd been in the youth team. So it was kind of a cyclical thing. They kind of introduced me to it. I probably got closer to it, and then they kind of came back. My mum's always been alongside that, but she worked in Ulster University, and the time that we always went to Lourdes was Down in Connor was also the time of graduations. And because she would often be the person reading out the list of names on the stage, it just always conflicted. But she's been out loads of times, certainly as a pilgrim.
Yeah. And did you also volunteer with the Irish Pilgrimage Trust for the Easter pilgrimage at some stage?
Yes, yeah, I have. I went with them, I can't remember the year, but maybe it's 2008 actually. Yeah, I think it was the year of the Jubilee. Absolutely amazing organisation, and I've stayed in contact with them since and kind of tried to work, alongside them as much as anything else. And then I went at Easter. So now I would do my stage at Easter normally. And so, would have touch points with IPT as well as formally as well as informally. I mean, I think in an ideal world, I'd go out with a different group every week and to have the crack and enjoy it. But it comes to the point where I think there was one year I was out 4 times medically, and you just get so exhausted. As you can understand, if you're using your annual leave to go to Lourdes, it's amazing, but it's not really a break. So I think it's that sort of trying to support people where they need it. So if there's a great need and there's somebody who's a good story and approaches me with a good kind of appeal, usually I find it quite hard to say no. But it's been great as well just to see how different people do their pilgrimages, and the one common thread is, I guess, the joy of the pilgrims and also the dedication of the staff and volunteers, because we're all doing the same thing slightly differently, but ultimately it all feels the same.
I think you were one of the founding members of Service. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, so I mean, it's nice to think of it as one of the founding members. That is correct. I mean, it started with me in an email address and a kind of like, what are we going to do here? But quickly, a lot of people came on board, which was really, really great. So Service was actually the idea of Dr. Alessandro De Franciscis, who's the permanent physician in the sanctuary. So he's, the person who would be at the medical bureau. And the UK for a long time have had a medical association, and had been on the go for about 40 years, but was quite, formal. It still is, but it's a great organisation. I'm closely tied to it. What he said was, though, he'd really like to start to build strengths and networks between pilgrimages, because there was the sense in which, especially if you think of Ireland on its own, but Italy, you could equally say, people sort of fly in and fly out on the same planes, but there's no connection between the groups. Essentially, what he wanted to do from a medical point of view was for me to work in Ireland to try and build networks of pilgrimages with a specific focus on, healthcare professionals. So to try and share knowledge, experience, and also resources. But the other thing we would do is we've had really generous donations from fundraisers where people have bought us defibrillators and other equipment that we now leave out in Lourdes, and so people can share. So rather than putting it all on a plane and then off the plane and each diocese having their own, what we want to have is kind of the big pieces of equipment that we share out there. And then the main thing that we share, I think, is knowledge. The complexities of Lourdes medical care are not necessarily the medicine itself, but it's what happens if someone needs palliative care, which happened to us a couple of years ago. What happens when you have to leave someone in Lourdes? Who should stay with them? How do we interact with the tour operators? What does the medical insurance cover? And it's all sorts of logistical things that, one diocese might have a very kind of deep understanding of because of some experience that they've had. So we try just to do that best practice sharing to really cross-pollinate ideas. And also then the big part of service, we would normally have an annual meeting in Dublin or in or around Dublin. It's just catching up with people who have that sort of shared experience and kind of keeping each other going, I think, for one more year, because you've got people maybe who've been going for years and years and years who feel that they probably want to give it a rest for a year. But there's that common understanding that much of what we understand to be the pilgrimage experience hangs on volunteers of all types. But really, crucially, without a medical or nursing team, it would really change the nature of what those pilgrimages are. And so it's really important that those people remain motivated and dedicated to the cause.
I just wanted to ask you, I know a few years ago you were appointed to the international committee that evaluates cures in Lourdes, and I remember reading at one stage that the appointment came very much as a surprise to you. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how it came about?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge surprise. It still is to a degree. I think now the difference is I've just got older and kind of more used to it, but it came as a surprise in that I think it came by email, and I was in the office I worked in Queens and I was doing my PhD in the lab, and it was a formal letter from the Bishop of Tarbes in Lourdes and Monsignor Bouvet at the time, and it was just a formal invitation to join the International Medical Committee of Lourdes, which completely blew me away. I had discussions with Dr. De Francis before that. The primary focus of the discussion though was Servais, in the sense that he wanted me to build a network. I feel like what happened in the background was he'd sort of given me that task. I'd taken it away and come back to him with some sort of solution, and it was very much a very basic structure at the start, and it's built into something now which has a nice kind of rhythm to it. But I think that in his mind he was probably thinking, is this the right person, for me to engage with? Because I think International Medical Committee of Lourdes in its core sense is really the committee that looks at the people who've claimed to have had miraculous cures, and then we look at it obviously from the medical side. So it's a complex kind of fine line between cure and unexplained cure and miracle. But also there's the social aspect of it, and what he was trying to do was build an international sort of network of Lourdes, medics essentially. And for Ireland, he wanted to have someone who would be a sort of a channel of communication, and then I guess someone who would work behind the scenes to kind of build that network and strengthen the connection between the sanctuary and the country. So I feel like now that I look back on it, that's probably what was happening behind the scenes. But at I think I was 33 maybe. I can't really exactly remember, but totally bowled me over. And even my first meeting, I could barely speak because I kind of was so intimidated and impressed by the people I was with. There's some really, really fantastic academics and clinicians on that panel. And it's just really nice, I suppose, over the evolution of time, going each year. And last year, of course, it was virtual. I really do feel like now part of that. And, I feel like I've got quite strong bonds to the committee. And we all offer something different. And it's just been a privilege from start to finish.
And I presume the committee, you'd all have, expertise in different medical areas. Is that the way it works? Yeah. And how many people are you talking about on the committee?
So there's about 40 people, and at the minute it's a committee for life. So it's if people come on, people don't usually go off unless they choose to retire. So age-wise, it probably tends towards the upper range, to put it sort of politely. But what I would say is, like, the people are amazing. They're all very accomplished in their field. And the other point that you make is correct. So you would have a real range of specialties. Or the other thing that's important is that you have networks of people. So essentially, often the people who have unexplained cures at Lourdes, we would, they don't neatly fall into nice boxes. So it sometimes relies on, say, someone in Italy, for example, in northern Italy, having a network of specialists that they can reach out to, because the whole point is that we don't do the investigations or examinations medically ourselves, but it's knowing who the right independent people might be to take it to the next step. So it's about people who are sort of well recognized in their field, so that if they write a letter to another professor of, neurology or whatever in Paris, that they will take the patient on, examine them, give a full report, because it's all of this for the patient and for any doctors involved is a huge amount of work because of the stringency of the process.
Michael, I know between 7,000 and 8,000 people claim to have been cured in Lourdes, but only 70 have actually been deemed a miracle. Now, I know miracles have to be instantaneous and permanent, but are there other criteria needed as well?
So the big, there's the criteria that we really relate to are the Lambertini criteria, and that goes back to the 1700s. And there's about 7 or 8, I think it's 7 criteria that we have to stick to. So the ones that you've mentioned, but also it has to be deemed to be a serious illness, but that's then a bit of a kind of a spectrum, like who decides what's serious or not. There also has to be confirmed disease, so it's that's the big one, I think. The thing about these is that you have to have really firm evidence of disease before, and then firm evidence of disease after, and Lourdes sitting neatly in between. And that's where, it can be difficult. The other thing I would say that we can only look at as per the Lambertini criteria are physical illnesses. So anything mental health, and it's not to say that that's not important, because from us, from a medical point of view, but also from a personal point of view, we understand the burden of mental illness, but also how Lourdes as a spiritual kind of experience can sometimes really lighten people's loads, especially maybe when they're dealing with bereavement or something. There's definitely an impact there mentally. The problem with us is that we can't measure it. There's no blood test for depression that says it was really high 3 months ago, but now it's within normal range. Whereas with cancer, if you've got a biopsy that shows cancer's there, and then you do another biopsy and it shows cancer's gone, that's much more black and white. So we as a committee are working within the constraints of a very imperfect set of criteria that were determined by the church. Nonetheless, we respect their importance. And then there's been lots of discussions over the last couple of years, or even last maybe 10 years, about whether we need kind of a new set of criteria to judge. But the bottom line, if we want to break it down into simple things, is you need to have evidence of a disease that is definitely there. So say, for example, you would need to have, you can't just say I was blind in one eye. You would need to have tests of both eyes at multiple time points before you go to Lourdes to confirm that. And then something would happen, and then you have visual tests then after Lourdes that would say that no, this is definitely different. And then you would bring in that external kind of third party and doctor to investigate, or maybe multiple people, and then you would investigate it over time. So the permanence of the cure is another key part of it, where, it's not just at a point in time that something improves, but it's that it improves dramatically, or is, considered a complete cure and is permanent. So in the context of something like cancer, you'd want to make sure that it didn't recur. So you'd probably observe that patient over a number of years. And there's the other concept of, the cure in terms of people's symptoms versus what they have in their body. So for example, there was a case that was discussed a few years ago of a gentleman who had a lesion in his brain, who had, weakness down one side of the body and impaired mobility. And he wasn't actually Catholic, but he went to Lourdes with a group pilgrimage from his local area. And when he got home in Lourdes, he felt like he was physically, something had happened, and therefore he was able to then move let's say it was his right side, I can't remember exactly, more than he had been. He was able to walk without aid, and to that on the face value looks like a cure, but from the medical point of view he still had the brain lesion. So that raises the question, it didn't disappear on the MRI scan, nonetheless that person feels cured. And so where we sit as a committee is most people come at it from the faith background, but we have to kind of park that at the door and come into the room and then look at it purely from the medical side. So there are certain people who would say, and I totally appreciate this view, why are we trying to push a human solution onto a divine intervention? And then there's the skeptics who won't believe in it at all. But essentially what we're, trying to do is discuss these cases in a scientific way. That doesn't in any way, we hope not to then take away from people's personal experiences. So say someone feels that they were cured, but maybe doesn't have the right evidence. That's not a feeling or anything that we think then lacks validity. It's just that we're working within such tight constraints that we're only looking at it in the medical and scientific sense. But we do fully appreciate that there's a whole other spiritual sense and this sort of biopsychosocial side of medicine that's not just about tablets and surgery and stuff. that maybe makes much more of a difference to the person's life. And so we would be very respectful of people's personal experiences, and we wouldn't want to be saying that just because the cure isn't deemed to be a cure by the International Medical Committee of Lourdes does not mean that in that person's faith experience isn't a cure. That's a personal decision.
There are so many lovely places in Lourdes. Is there one place in particular that you say, oh yeah, that's where I love to be?
Aside from the grotto, which is obviously the place that always kind of feels like home, and it feels like a portal, I think, between sort of heaven and earth, almost as if there's like a direct channel, which is the kind of the obvious choice. I'll take it 2 steps back. So I love opposite the grotto, sitting at the other side of the river and watching the kind of busyness. And then if you take a couple of steps back, so this is my 4 favorite places, the roof of the hospital, because it's the most beautiful kind of aspect of the grotto, the mountains, the town, the chateau. But also then this really builds the importance of the best view in Lourdes, kind of from a hotel or from anything, is actually for the assisted pilgrims. And I love that ethos of Lourdes where the best is reserved for those with special needs or extra needs. And then my personal place, if you take another couple of steps back, is the Carmelite Chapel, where they have Vespers at 5 o'clock in the evening. And that was something I only really discovered a few years ago. But if you go up out the back of the hospital, say if I'm having a busy day in the Accueil in Notre Dame, whiz out the back street, down two doors and into the Carmelite Chapel for Vespers. And that's something really magical. And although it doesn't look like it, I don't know, people will probably know this, but from the steps of that church, you have a direct view down to the grotto.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, I was up there a few times Mass, and it's just so special. You just sort of feel, wow, this is just a beautiful place to be.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Michael, for talking to us today. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And can I just ask you before we sign off if you would leave us with a thought for the day?
Absolutely, Joan. Yeah, thanks. It's been really great to chat to you as well and share the story. The thought for the day I was thinking about, and it's kind of a Donegal link and a bit of a Lourdes link as well. I think in sense, so near here where I am in Donegal at the minute is Arts Priory. And a few years ago I went on retreat there with priest Daniel O'Leary, and the theme of the retreat was the divine beauty of the human heart. And in a sense, it's kind of like the concept of, I think the COVID context as well has made us realise that we haven't had connections with church. We haven't been able to go to Lourdes. We haven't been physically present for the Eucharist. It's that kind of sense in which we have to kind of draw out that from within ourselves, in the sense, and recognise that we do have God within us. So I suppose the summary that I was thinking of this morning, just thinking about this, was probably Christ be within me, and then the concept of Christ all around us as well. So in nature, and it's really trying to recognise what we say in Lourdes as well. Try and take Lourdes with you through the year. If you only get to go once a year, maybe once every few years, it's keeping Lourdes with you in your heart through that journey. And I think the coronavirus pandemic has kind of taught us that that's actually what we've had to do with our whole Catholicism and our sort of spiritual identity, to make sure that we do appreciate that just because we're not in a church, that we still are divine beings, and also that we're surrounded by the beauty of creation and really trying to see God in the everyday.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was really lovely. And it's been absolutely lovely talking to you. Thank you so much.